Everybody, good morning. I feel like a lot of times I talk right before lunch, so I'll try to keep this exciting. Krista gave me 29 and a half minutes to talk, so I got my watch here. I'll stay on track. It's an honor to come to get to talk with you. I'm going to be talking about the Nature Conservancy's Ohio Mitigation Program, Stream and Wetland Restoration Program, and how it's touching down in the conservation community around the state. And I had the honor to give a presentation at the Coalition of Ohio Land Trust meeting this past fall. And Krista was there and asked me to come here and talk. So those of you that were at that meeting, I hope this isn't too repetitive. But now you know the notes, and you can ask the hard questions at the end. So the mitigation program that I'm going to talk about has its origins in the Clean Water Act. It's a really, really important federal law. There's a state of Ohio law that is very similar. But basically, it's a recognition that our streams and our wetlands are really, really important to natural resources, but also the economics of our waterways. And it requires that any developer who is going to impact a stream or wetland with their development project has to get a permit in order to do that. And in order to get a permit, they have to offset those impacts. And these regulations have evolved over time. In the 70s and 80s, this wasn't really even thought of as a requirement for development. In the late 80s and early 90s, this idea of no net loss, that we were not going to lose any more of our streams and any more of our wetlands. Ohio has the dubious distinction of destroying the most of our wetlands, second most in the United States. So again, what's left is very precious. The regulations are meant to not stop development, but make development happen in appropriate ways, and then also pay the real price of offsetting that work. Prior to the Nature Conservancy's In Lieu Fee program, the two options that were available for this offset work was the developer doing their own offset. And I often say, you can imagine Walmart building a new big box store, all the parking lots, everything associated with it. They're impacting a wetland, half acre of wetland and all that development, and they mitigate that by building a wetland behind their dumpsters, that's supposed to replace that wetland that was getting filled in. As you can imagine, that is really hard to do. It's really hard to make that successful. And in fact, in 2010 or 11, the Ohio EPA came out with a study, found that 60% of those mitigation projects were ecological failures. So there was a big concern. These were sprinkled all over the state. They were failing, and no one really knew how to regulate them. Mitigation banks are something that is a tool that basically someone can develop wetlands on their property, permanently protect those wetlands and show that they're successful, and then sell offsetting credits to the folks that are doing development. That's really a complicated process.
It's hard to do. There's a lot of risk. There's a lot of upfront expense. But it can be really successful. You know, instead of having a bunch of scattered, failing little wetlands behind people's dumpsters, you have one big wetland that is well funded, it's designed well, it's providing conservation value. The problem with those is there's not enough of them. And because they're risky and take a lot of work, there's not the opportunity for those credits to be available. Five Rivers Metro Parks is here today. They have a mitigation bank, but I think that's the one of the only ones in Southwest Ohio. So after that Ohio EPA report came around showing the failure of developer-led mitigation, the director of the Ohio EPA came to the Nature Conservancy and said, hey, you guys have been doing mitigation in Virginia for 20 years. Would you mind doing a similar program in Ohio? And that's kind of where we got our start. This is a big deal. Mitigation in Ohio affects 134,000 feet of stream on average every year, and over 300 acres of wetlands every year. So there's a lot of impact, and if you have 60% failure, you are having a net loss of our aquatic resources, right? So the Nature Conservancy saw all this and decided, yeah, we could do this. We could set this program up. If we can get rid of that 60% failure rate, or mostly get rid of that, that's a huge conservation win. But we also thought, hey, this would be great also to focus the funds and the restoration work in areas that make the most conservation impact in our state. So getting rid of the aquatic resource restoration failures, and then also doing them in places that make the most impact was kind of what our focus was. So to explain an in lieu fee program, which is what our restoration project is, we sell those same credits that a mitigation bank sells, but we haven't done the restoration work yet. We sell it in a watershed. It could be multiple entities buying credits from us. And we use that money then to go out and look for restoration projects and do that restoration. There's a strong concern that impacts that are happening in one part of the state aren't being transported to another part of the state to fund a restoration project. So we work within 43 service areas around the state. So if we gather funds in one watershed, that's where we do the restoration project. So part of getting to the point of getting rid of the failures of these restoration projects, there's a lot of stipulations that we have to deal with. I mentioned staying within the same watershed. Another one is having a 3-year timeline. So when we sell credits, we have 3 years to get to the point of doing a restoration project, so that there's not a temporal loss. The developer is going ahead and filling their wetland when they buy credits from us. If we wait 10 years to do a restoration project, there will be 10 years without that offset restoration work. The other thing is there's a lot of government agencies that oversee our program, and we have to make each one of them happy. There's a long process of planning and approval that we have to go through. And then the land we do the work on has to be permanently protected. So as I mentioned, we thought as we were setting this program up, wouldn't this be great if we could tie these mitigation dollars to conservation efforts that are already being thought about by conservation partners around the state, and we can use these funds to enhance their conservation efforts. So when we sell credits in a watershed, we're reaching out to the conservation partners within that watershed to say, hey, you know, we have these funds to do restoration work. Do you have any potential for us to utilize these funds on land you own or land you're interested in having restoration work done on? Another part of the in lieu fee mitigation aspect is we want to make sure that the developers are paying for their offset. That we don't undersell our credit pricing so that they're impacting a wetland or a stream, they buy credits from us, and then we or one of our conservation partners has to put in extra money to make this happen. So there's no instances of matching that's required. The Nature Conservancy, and when we're doing one of these projects, we need to pay for everything that's going on. So, you know, if there's property appraisals, if there's design work that is happening, the permanent protection part of the land, that needs to be paid for from the program. And then the other thing we recognized is this idea of trying to find sites that are enhancing the the watershed or the aquatic resource conservation opportunities within a watershed. We developed a site selection checklist with a big host of folks around the state to help us score out potential projects. So as I mentioned, we have this full cost accounting requirement where our the credit funds have to pay for the site selection work we do, the acquisition, the design, the restoration, the permanent protection, and the long-term management of these projects. And all that gets put into our credit fees, and that's what's charged to the developers. One of the things that we've noticed is the higher credit prices are, and this is nationally, the higher credit prices are, the more the developers are able to avoid impacting the wetlands and streams on their properties. So, if they have that financial incentive to try to develop their design on that piece of property to not impact those wetlands and not impact those streams, they find it easier to avoid. And ultimately, that's a really big win for our streams and wetlands. So permanent protection, we can take a lot of different forms for our restoration projects. We can work on privately held land with a conservation easement on it. We can work on public lands, federal, state, local public lands. And lands that are held by nonprofits or easements that they hold. So I mentioned the fact that as we sell credits, we start looking for projects in those watersheds. Right now we have 29 of those 43 watersheds where we've sold some amount of credits in them. That represents 80 acres of land and over 20,000 feet of stream. Now, I failed to mention that our program was just set up in 2015, so we're relatively new. Now I'm gonna, talking broadly about our program and about mitigation in particular. Now I'm gonna kind of just dive into some specific projects that we're working on. This Jacoby Creek Restoration Project, we've heard it referenced a few times today. It's really exciting. It's exactly what we were envisioning when we were setting this program up, where we have these credits, these funds to do restoration work, and we have a community need for conservation and restoration. So Jacoby Creek is a high-quality stream flowing into a national scenic river. It, on this particular piece of property, has a long history of abuse. If you're here tomorrow, I'm going to talk more about that and about the restoration work we're planning to do. But the total budget for this project is in the hundreds of thousands of dollars when we get to paying for the design, paying for the the actual stream restoration and the wetland restoration, planting all the plants, we're going to reforest about 50 acres of agraria, and we then will be paying for the conservation easement on the property where the stream restoration is going to go, and providing a long-term management endowment to Tecumseh, so they can, into perpetuity, fund making sure the conservation easement and the land is well protected. And then I'll just bounce around the state a little bit. This is a project that's in the planning phase, and again, because we're so new, all our projects are in the planning phase. We have our first one, which is in Adams County, where the construction part of our restoration project is going to be starting in the spring. This is a project a piece of property that's owned by a private individual who was already working with Three Valley Conservation Trust and the Ohio EPA to put a conservation easement, agriculture easement on his property. And when we reached out to Three Valley to say, hey, we have funds in the lower Great Miami, do you have any sites you'd recommend? They said, how about this one? And we've gone out there several times. It's on a high quality stream. It has some major issues on that piece of property from past land use, and the restoration would be a big boost to the watershed. It also ties in nicely with other protected lands nearby, and we have this. We'll be able to fund an easement that will wrap around the streams on that piece of property. This is a project, the Grafton Correctional Institution, which is in Lorain County. So we're bouncing up to the northern part of the state. Has a bunch of land. It's a former agricultural correctional institution, so the inmates actually farm the land around the prison, and that was closed several years ago because of budget cuts. And so now the inmates are just hanging out in the cells. They don't have that additional work that might have kept them busy and engaged. The state of Ohio is actually selling off a lot of the land around these old agricultural prisons, and we approached them and said, hey, you got this 120 acres near your institution. has a lot of old wetlands in it, that were drained and tiled by the farming practices. Would you be interested in providing a conservation easement on this piece of property instead of selling it off? And then we agreed to work with the prison to give the inmates who are interested the opportunity to raise native plants, to plant those plants in the wetland, and even go through weed management training. So they would be. This is a minimal security prison, so when they're getting out of the prison system, they would have some marketable skills that they could potentially utilize for getting jobs. So really exciting project there. This is another state of Ohio project, and I apologize, the map is so little there. But this is a wildlife management area that was purchased back in the 1950s, I believe. It's used as hunting area for the state. Basically the state bought it, and it's just been sitting there for 50 years being utilized. So if you walk this piece of property, the trails are eroded, the stream is a mess from those past land practices. It's growing up in forest, but there's a lot of this past disturbance that is still has a legacy of pushing sediment down through the stream systems. So again, we would be able to pay for the restoration and revegetation and invasive species control on this piece of property. We're going through a process of partnering with Cuyahoga Valley National Park and Cleveland Metro Parks. They own this piece of land along the Cuyahoga River. It's a huge wetland complex that is filled with Phragmites and narrowleaf cattail and other invasive plants. It could be a really huge resource for that stretch of the Cuyahoga River that, as we all know, is starting to rebound from catching on fire a few years ago, right? So this would, the Cuyahoga Valley National Park doesn't have funds to do land management. They've protected this land, but they can't do anything with it. Cleveland Metro Parks has a really strong desire to partner with Cuyahoga Valley National Park, but they haven't been able to do that, to kind of figure that out. So the Nature Conservancy is working through that whole process. So we'll be able to do a restoration project on this 120 acres of wetlands. We've been working with the Little Miami Conservancy to look at doing some restoration on a preserve that they have very nearby, and still working through some processes around the permanent protection, and working through some agreements with WRSP, which Angela's going to be talking about that program in a little bit. Again, this is a really exciting process where we'll be working with a land trust if we can get over some hurdles to do restoration work. This is a piece of land that's permanently protected. It's had some restoration work on it, but it still has a very active tile drainage system. It's an old farm field, and so we feel like there's some potential. There's already a Category 3 wetland on the site. There's potential to expand that if those tiles are broken. And then almost forgot, there's a Lowhead Dam on the Little Miami that these funds could be utilized to remove. So Krista, I'm right on schedule.
All right.
So just to finish up, we are really excited about making sure these mitigation funds are utilized in a way that we stop the loss, the ecological failures that were happening in the past, and we're having the funds utilized to fund restoration projects where they're most needed around the state. There are challenges to it. One is the small watersheds that we work in, those 43 watersheds, and the 3-year timeline mean that we don't have giant amount of money to fund really large restoration projects. It also means that the process is kind of sporadic. We have some credit sales in a watershed, we do a project, and then we may not have any credit sales in that watershed for another 5-10 years. And then we're, again saying, hey, does anybody have any potential projects? So there's that piece of it. The other piece is the land has to be permanently protected, and that means no severed mineral rights or oil and gas rights. It's not a huge problem in southwest Ohio, but when we get to southeast Ohio, almost everything is got gas leases on it, or coal, ancient coal. Severed rights, so it makes it hard to find properties that we can work in. And then we have a 3-year timeline which says you got to move fast to find sites and get them restored. But then we have this 4-step approval process that actually creates a lot of planning time into these projects, and that balancing those can be difficult. And then the idea that the mitigation rules say that our easement holders, if we're helping a land trust or a park district buy an easement or buy a piece of land, the rule says the easement holder has to be of good standing. We don't know what that means. There's not a thing that says if the land trust does this, they have good standing. We do feel like the land trust, if a land trust has gone through the Land Trust Alliance accreditation, that should be a really good indicator that we'll be able to get over that hurdle. But we're still working with all those agencies to kind of figure that out. I will say that as the program's pretty new, as we move forward, we'll tend to be doing multiple projects in a watershed. We'll tend to be bugging conservation partners more and more about potentially doing work. Bellbrook and Sugar Creek, you guys I think recently sent us some potential sites. So I think there's more and more activity over time as our program moves forward. But that's all I wanted to say. I welcome you to email me or call me if you have anything that you're thinking about that might be a potential project, and also just if you have any questions. And maybe got a couple minutes for questions?
Yeah, we got a couple minutes for questions.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's wait for a microphone. Is that?
I can talk to one.
Well, I think they're recording it.
Hello. When you have a project that is connected to wildlife, do you have to get with Fish and Wildlife and get a Section 7 approval?
Yes. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service sits on the interagency review team So they review every one of our projects. And we also, when we're doing stream restoration or wetland restoration, we have to get a permit through the Clean Water Act that shows that we're not doing additional or harm to these resources. So they get to look at it that way also. And then ODNR through their threatened and endangered species laws also get to review our projects. Yeah. You can throw it, I think.
So I was especially intrigued by, you said that Ohio is notorious for destroying wetlands. I'm wondering, how does that come about? Does it have anything to do with fracking or any other?
So that's a historic thing that we've destroyed historically. We're one of the top states to have destroyed most of our wetlands already. Historically, there was the Great Black Swamp along Lake Erie that doesn't exist anymore. It was hundreds of thousands of acres. So the destruction of that caused us to move up in that list. That happened in the late 1800s. So we continue to have a lot of development in Ohio. But the Ohio laws are, if you look around the country, Ohio laws are some of the most protective in that if a wetland on your property is of high quality, a Category 3 wetland, you will not get a permit to be able to destroy it. If you have a wetland that's of low quality, they may give a permit. You have to show that you've tried to avoid it, and then you have to offset it through mitigation before the permit will be allowed. Other states are less strong in that aspect.
Thank you.
Hello.
Hi.
When you are restoring these wetlands and these streams, what kind of factors do you take? Do you have a reference wetland that you compare it to, and how do you determine what kind of outcome you want from restoring these projects?
Right. That's a great segue into my talk tomorrow. I didn't plant her here, but that's what I'll be talking about tomorrow. The restoration science is really involved, and it's relatively new. So we don't have specifically formulas that we can follow that say this is exactly how you do it to make this successful. So there's a lot of trial and error that goes into restoration projects. I'm thankful that I can stand on the shoulders of those failures, so we can have a better idea of what we're doing. But you mentioned reference reaches. That's an important part. We look around the local area before we do a restoration project and find streams or wetlands that are intact and in good shape, so we know what kind of species are needed there, what the stream should look like, that kind of thing. So that is a big part of the work we do.
And do you also take samples of nitrogen, mineralization, things that are going on at a micro level as well? We do. It doesn't necessarily strongly inform the design. It's good to know, and there are people that are doing research to show what happens in the soil ecosystem after restoration project or after native plants are restored in a site, and they're seeing differences. Generally, with the same thing with wildlife species, the idea is if you build it, they will come. So we're restoring the wetlands, we're restoring the streams, and the aquatic species will come
and the soils and those kind of things will heal just from the fact that we're doing the restoration we're doing.
All right, there's one more question, and I'm going to move you towards lunch.
You talked about the idea of if you build it, they will come. Do you ever actually reintroduce species or reintroduce any type of animal or plant into this ecosystems just to see if they don't come?
Right, yes, we do, and tomorrow I'll talk about that if you're able to come more specifically. If people had other questions, I know it's lunchtime, so yeah.
How many employees do you have, and on top of giving the funds, do your employees actually go and do the restoration work themselves, or through the fund people get employed to do it?
Yeah, good question. So the mitigation program for the Nature Conservancy, we have 3 staff. The Nature Conservancy in Ohio has about 50 staff, and then worldwide we have about 3,500 staff doing conservation work all over the world. Generally, our mitigation program hires environmental consultants to do the work, and we just oversee it and do the planning. So, thank you guys.
Let's give Devin a hand. Thank you. Okay, our lunch is in room 226, and we've got drinks out at the table. We're going to give you a special dispensation here to be back in the room and ready to go by 12:40 rather than 12:30 that's on the schedule. But please do try to bring here, and I think you can bring stuff back in if you're still finishing up your lunch. That's okay. We'll just want to clean up at the end of the day. Thanks so much.